Hello, I'm Brian Critchell and I'm here today with James Churcher, Pensions Manager of the Telegraph Media Group. It's a common perception, Jim, that employers deliberately spend less on DC pensions than they did if they had a DB scheme previously. That's a sort of negative comment that doesn't help very much, and saving your presence, the media trots that out quite regularly. But it isn't helped. There isn't really a clear idea of what a good DC scheme is, and we started this conversation by saying we'd like to work towards making DC schemes as good as they can be. You've obviously tackled this quite seriously at Telegraph, but looking around at what other evidence there is. But the pension quality mark basis looks a bit complicated. Nest contribution structure, very complicated, lots of additional administration potentially involved. Haven't we missed an opportunity here, remembering what we said at the beginning about keeping a concept as simple as possible? Are we going to end up with additional administration in the new world of DC, or do you think that you and others like you could actually influence the outcome before it's too late?
I do agree with you that I think a lot of employers moving from DB to DC for reasons of risk management used it as an opportunity simply to cut pension spending. And there's no magic about this. If you had a DB scheme with a funding rate of 20 or 25% and you replace it with a DC scheme where the employer pays 3 or 5%, obviously, however good the investments, that scheme is not going to produce the same benefits. That's not because DC is inherently inferior, but DC with very small contributions obviously is nowhere near as good as a good DB scheme. DC with contributions of 15 or 20% will produce real pensions.
Right.
So I think there was an element of hiding behind the fact that people didn't understand the switch from DB to DC to take the opportunity to cut costs. Right. There is, of course, a review going on as we speak, where the new government is looking at the auto-enrolment and Nest proposals. I've had no personal input into that, but obviously, if anybody asks me, I'll make my comment. I've been engaged with what NAPF have been doing, and NAPF have pushed very hard and with some success already for some breaths of common sense to come into some of the proposals, yes, that were put on the table. So I'm still hopeful that the employer duty requirements will be made more manageable. I've never been a fan of the Nest proposals, and actually one of the many dangers with it is that a typical employee who's not been in a pension scheme before will think the government has designed this, I'm participating in it, so that's my retirement sorted out. And whatever is the right answer to how much do you need to save over a lifetime to live well when you've stopped working, nobody believes it's 8%. It's going to be inadequate, and yes, there is a real danger that people will think, I've paid into that, I've done enough. Still, it's a time of recession, it's economically very difficult for employers who weren't running a pension scheme, even to find 3% of payroll more than they used to find. Yes, is still going to take, some budgeting and some managing, and we're going to start with 1, 2, 3. We're starting somewhere, but it's not enough, and it is complicated. One of the things that I think is in danger of being an unforeseen knock-on effect that we don't want, there are many good occupational schemes already running with quite generous contribution rates, but based on basic salary. The new employer duty requirements, Nest contributions, are small percentages based on band earnings between, yes, the LEL and the UEL, but that takes into account things like commissions, bonuses, overtime payments that traditionally haven't been pensionable. So the company's overall spend on pensions may be a lot more generous than the Nest requirements, but there will be some employees where sometimes the Nest requirement comes bigger than the old scale. And it's very difficult for finance people to plan a business on the basis of the greater of. And I think that will create a pressure to level down the big level of contributions on basic salary and say, well, look, we have to do this smaller level based on this complicated formula. If that's what we have to do, we'll do that. And curiously, the idea of a safety net may actually suppress what people are already doing.
Yes, I agree with you. That's a real fear. I wonder if the clever people in the industry might help in persuading the government that there's a role for actuaries here in the world of DC, perhaps, you know, by evaluating contribution structures and certifying. After all, in the public sector, if you take on public work and you want your employees to be admitted to a public sector scheme like local government, or if you take people out of a of the public sector and put them into your private sector scheme in order to have a government contract, then you can certify that the arrangements you've got are at least as generous. Yes. So there must be a way of solving it with some form of
yes. Something like in normal circumstances 90% of people were better off in this, or something. Yes.
Well, but that's such a common sense approach, and I see you agree with me that rather reduces the likelihood of it coming into operation. Am I being too cynical? Jim, thanks very much again.
Thanks, Brad.
Bye-bye.